Chapter 15. Don't think of the children, think of the rubies. So what's going on? To understand Valinar's reference, I need to momentarily take you guys back to the early stages of the campaign, when the party was around level 2 to 3. The beginning of this story, when they went back to the Asarian Temple with the Salt Rift, was at level 7, because it has a bit of a complicated origin. It is customary for my players to work with me in private when they want to get involved in conspiracies or plans and the like. This particular subplot had been devised in conjunction with Valinar's player and eventually with Rakim's player too. We don't screw over other characters' stories without express approval. The best part of these things the expressions in the other players' faces when it is all revealed, usually leading to a series of revelations of all the hidden stuff people had going on. This whole story is one great example of all that. Hassan's player keeps me constantly posted with ideas and long-term plans, which are not always revealed promptly to the rest of the party. I did reveal to you guys one tiny bit many posts ago, however, regarding the fate of Falbala. Around those days, the party was involved in the investigation of a series of ugly murders, in which the victims were all boiled down and stripped of their flesh. Initially, it all seemed to be tied to a bunch of crazy cannibals that worshipped Urgathoa, Galarian's goddess of undeath, gluttony, and disease, living beneath the sewers of Katapesh. The same guys who had kidnapped Nidaros, the half-eaten fellow mentioned before that was now part of the Saltspit City Council. At the climax of that particular plot, the party managed to escape the cultists, which was of course chock full of Temple of Doom references, through an underground river, but Valinar was left behind because he was checking some relics in the inner sanctum of the cult's high priest. Long story short, Valinar was almost eaten alive. But through some very clever ideas and role-playing, this player has quite the knack of solving almost every possible scenario through diplomacy, blackmailing, and not healing his party. I honestly can't remember the last time he picked up a weapon in a D&D or Pathfinder campaign. Managed to talk out the High Priest, who eventually offered him a deal. His life, and more importantly, a mortal soul, in exchange for a host. Now, the explanation the High Priest gave to Valinar was very cryptic and confusing, but it gave him just enough information to be able to do some additional research on his own. As it turns out, none of that had anything to do with Urgathoa. The cult was merely a tool for a more obscure and convoluted plan, involving none other than the denizens of Leng, creatures hailing from a mysterious and terrifying realm that in the scant volumes that mention it seem to suggest it as a last remnant of some long-forgotten reality, prior even to the current multiverse. The denizens of Leng do have a presence in Galarian, and several of them exist hidden among the courts of the mighty, influencing the courts of history with goals no one understands. They are also not strangers to Katapesh, where they dabble in selective slave trading. For some reason they seem to highly value specific kinds of people, which they trade for absurdly valuable rubies. Or at least everyone thinks they're rubies. Personally, they kind of remind me of the Yugolovs in their endless quest to experiment and discover the true nature of evil. The kind of villains that are not really bad guys, just uncaring entities, for which the mortals are just yet another tool in their repertoire. Anyway, in secret and without knowledge from the rest of the party, Valinar started meeting with envoys from the High Priest. Random individuals whose mind had been blanked out, and honestly seemed more like puppets made of flesh and bone. And slowly he began understanding what was going on. The High Priest wasn't working for anyone in particular, but for himself. As it happens, the denizens of Leng are beings whose bodies are made up of a malleable, fleshy substance that they can control at will. Which is one of the reasons why they are really ugly when quote-unquote relaxed. But existing for too long away from Leng, or regions of the multiverse which are somehow connected to Leng, had detrimental effects on said bodies. So the High Priest, trapped in Galarian since time immemorial, has been working on means to fix that shortcoming. So far, stealing the flesh of certain individuals he had previously identified as useful had helped as a patch measure, but he was getting to a point where he could no longer sustain his physical form, so he needed a host. To this end, the High Priest had been dabbling in the creation of a perfect host, capable of sustaining the twisted essence of a denizen of Leng. One that would be able to sustain itself in Galarian without decomposing into sickly black jelly, something no other denizen had been able to manage so far. And, as Valinar had found during his investigation, there were many other denizens interested in such a solution, but they were all too fragmented to work together. For this host to work out, however, it would have to be conceived for a natural process. The High Priest had been trying to implant the host in 2 pregnant women kidnapped from the city above, but it all ended up with horrible miscarriages. But now, there was Valinar. What he had to do was get the host, which was nothing more than a thick reddish liquid, into a man, who would then have to impregnate not just any woman, but an elf, something which was hard to find in Katapesh, as the High Priest figured out that the slower aging rate of elves and their natural immortality would be able to make up for the quick degeneration of the host suffered during gestation. Valenar smiled, knowing exactly who to use. Now, the romance between Rakim and Falbala would seem awfully convenient if not for the fact that it didn't exist at this point, nor was meant to happen. Falbala was a priestess, and a chaste one at that. The party did know her, and Valamar knew Rakim had shown restrained interest. He was a monk from Jalmaray with all the stuff about body perfection and purity, but everything was on a strict friend-zone level. But Valamar knew some alchemists, and the players knew that saving throws of both should be rather low at that point in the campaign, so he spent almost all of his money getting a love potion, making sure that the alchemists accidentally poured more of a certain component than what was advised, and that is how, during a trip to a desert settlement, the one they had visited prior to their trip in the Osirian Temple, Rakim and Falbala, who had been sent with them to help them escape the city after the party had been framed for a political murder, kept mysteriously disappearing at nights and seemed awfully relaxed the next day. With the two bastions of purity now shaking it like there was no tomorrow, getting the host into Rakim was child's play. Just add some raspberry and jam. You have the iconic healing potion, if a bit thicker than one would expect. Then Valenar, with the enormous patience that characterizes the player behind him, waited for things to take their course. He knew it would take quite a while. Adventures, journeys, and levels would come and go before getting any result. But if everything went according to plan, which, as I hope you would have presumed by now, wasn't exactly in the same line as the High Priests, it would be well worth the wait. Now let's get back to where we left off. Valenar had been quite glad they got the news about Falbala being pregnant. Even though elven pregnancies are supposed to last about 2 years, this wasn't problematic. The High Priest had informed him that the host would develop at an incredibly rapid rate, and in truth, Falbala was quite swollen only 6 months into pregnancy, and had been abnormally exhausted, which was also to be expected. In fact, the host should only require 3 to 4 months of gestation, after which it would remain there, living off the mother's vital energies, until she could go on no longer, which is why elves was such a good idea. At this point in the story, he trusted Hassan's unending thirst for money enough that he felt comfortable with sharing his plan. He needed Falbala's offspring in order to use it as a bargaining chip with the other denizens of Leng he had tracked down throughout all of his time. He knew at least 6 in Katapesh and many more that occasionally visited the city. There was in fact an entire slave trading company controlled by 3 of them. He had no intention of handing it over to the High Priest, whose agents had long ago become a footnote, now that he was considerably more powerful and resourceful than he was at level 3. This is why the trip to Jalmaray had been such a boon, and why Valenar had been so mindful of reminding Rakim that he would do whatever he could do as a priest to keep her comfortable and safe. It would allow him to carry on with the extraction without the risk of the High Priest's meddling. Hassan pondered. It was an ugly business. Sure, they had been using people as nightmare farms, forced good Katapeshi citizens into a life of slavery at the salt mines, and now they had kidnapped a kid because they needed the dreams he had. But now they were talking about Rakim and Falbala's kid. The former a companion of the adventurers, and the latter being a priestess that helped them survive and escape the authorities. Maybe it was all a bit too much. The denizens of Leng carry with them otherworldly rubies that go beyond any kind of gem you can imagine. Not even the Emir and his elemental associates could produce something like them. Valenar was, of course, leaving out the part about the enormous influence said denizens had over many nations of Galarian. He wasn't after more money, he wanted real power. Don't think of the children, Hassan, think of the rubies. But Hassan was still thinking. What Valenar didn't know is that Hassan was not really thinking about the moral consequences. He had him at otherworldly rubies. He was wondering if they weren't going to waste a unique opportunity. No, we are not going to give it out that easily. There is an opportunity here, said Hassan, coming out of his thoughts. Valenar was rather confused. What? Of course there is. We get the baby out, we hide it well, we contact some denizens, and we offer them the deal. Giving is the one who offers the most. My friend, what have we learned so far? That Hassan knows how to make money out of everything. He tapped his nose, and when Hassan finds a source of money, he makes sure that more will come after. Let me explain. So there in the warm, starry night of Jalmarain, in a beautiful garden in which plants grew in impossible manners and a small waterfall ran upward, he told him what he was thinking about. Mass production of hosts. If what Valanar had explained about Falbala being the proper way to get their hosts working was correct, then they were going to replicate the process. Why auction one baby among several denizens who could probably kill them and take it, when they could be making one for each of them? That's a lot more rubies, plus avoiding enemies from a dimension severed from a dead universe within the fathoms of time could well be seen as a positive externality of the transaction. Valanar was both confused and amazed by Hassan's plan. He saw the logic and he liked it. Just that, he had never thought of taking it to the next level. Things could get interesting now. Indeed they would. Chapter 16. A Pound of Flesh or Two. So Valanar and Hassan had decided what to do. They would kidnap Falbala in order to steal her child and hopefully find a way to replicate the process. Vorgok was there too, but it was hard to tell if he was even aware of what was going on, as he kept talking to imaginary friends and staring in awe at a magnificent woolly mammoth that wasn't even there. I'm not sure if I mentioned it in the thread, perhaps it was in the previous one where we did a lot of Q&A about the campaign, but back when the party was going along with the original plot they had to deal with a band of ritual assassins that kept trying to dispose of them or frame them for murder. The assassins were hired by one of the many crazy doomsday cults they were fighting over a very important artifact the players had, and attempted to sway the party into their side by argument, force, or highly volatile narcotics. They were the original cause of the party leaving Katapesh early on. Thing is, the way they took them out of the equation was striking a deal with the leader, a mind flayer by the name of Isak. It was essentially a whatever they can pay you, we can double it solution. Valanar had been in charge of said deal. He has the best diplomacy and bluff in the party, plus various argument-effective spells, such as Read Forts and Zone of Truth, and throughout the campaign kept contact with him in secret, just in case they ever needed the services of a centuries-old order of green-wearing assassins and kidnappers, which was precisely what they needed right now. The idea was to have the Order of the Green Veil, name it the Assassins led by Isak, kidnap Falbala while Valanar and Hassan did their best to keep Rakim away from her. The Sonk just knew far too much delicate information about all their operations, aside from being legally entitled to a big part of it through his share in the STC, and they could not risk him knowing what they were doing behind the whole thing. So they set up a situation involving an escaped genie from one of the local training schools in order to keep the party stuck in Jalmarain for about a week. Enough to have Green Veil's agents kidnap Falbala from Rakim's parents' house. They also had them take the kid in order to pacify the Sonk. Hassan simulated having felt second thoughts and leaving the kid behind. When Rakim went to check, they had to steal another kid from another house with similar characteristics, put it to sleep with magic, and then use disguise to make it seem like he was the same. Since Rakim had seen him for only a few moments, it actually worked. As you can imagine, there was much ruckus when Rakim found out that the Green Veil had struck back, and this time they had stole the elf carrying Rakim Jr. As he was never fully aware of how the assassins had been dealt with in the past, in fact no one knew except for Hassan, to whom Valanar revealed the truth when they concocted the plan about a week ago, he took it as a personal vendetta, shaking an angry fist at the sunset and all, and pressed to quickly abandon everything they were doing and just head back to Katapesh, where the Green Veil's base of operation was. Once there, he stormed every single place they had previously discovered to be somehow tied to the organization, thrashing several stores and smoking houses. The rest of the party followed suit, but Hassan and Valanar knew they wouldn't find her, as they had given specific orders to Isak for Falbala and the kid to be sent to Saltspit and hidden until they arrived. However, things quickly got complicated. In a few words. Number 1. Rakim found out where she was by using the same means they had previously used to track down Isak. Crystal spheres through which the assassins communicated. Yes, they made lots of Sauron jokes the first time they found it. The fact that the assassin lord from which they took the first one was a Cyclops did not help either. Number 2. Got to Saltspit, trashed Alshar and Gen's safe house, which had been used by the assassins to hide the hostages. 3. Tortured everything that could be tortured to know what happened, earning some points towards an alignment shift but not quite there yet since it was balanced out by the ultimate goal. 4. Eventually found out what was going on. 5. Choked Hassan to death. As in quite dead, not just below 0 HP. And demolished his face with his bare hands before getting knocked unconscious by Vorgok, who had a very hazy general picture of what was going on. He was also becoming less and less solid as time progressed, unsure of what was real and what wasn't.